Hi guys, welcome to Counterpoints. My name's Connor. I'm a science fiction, politics, and philosophy nerd, a Marine Corps and law enforcement veteran, and I would argue a real Republican, meaning that I actually have Republican values. MAGA does not, but that's a fight for a different day. Today, we're going to be going to the back half of The Distributist, a guy I very much dislike. He's a dissident right-wing philosopher, history nerd, whatever, versus Pisco, who's a liberal and a progressive who is debating The Distributist on whether or not Charlie Kirk and MAGA and Donald Trump are fascistic or fascists. That was the debate that we kind of watched yesterday. And then also whether or not liberalism is dead. Apparently, the second half of the debate gets a little bit more spicy. So I fast-forwarded a healthy chunk. We're going to break it down now. Let's go.
Can I have permission to take this conversation in an interesting direction?
Please, yes.
Can I cue something up? I actually kind of agree with that to a certain extent, and I agree that when free speech falls, it will not just simply be from the left, it will be both left and right simultaneously taking it down, because it will be sort of a prisoner's dilemma, as in all things. But when it comes to freedom, freedom is meaningless unless you determine freedom for what, right? What is?
And by the way, this is like instantaneously bullshit. I agree with ordered freedom. I think that freedom should be ordered. I think that you should have orienting principles in your life, whether it's philosophy or religion or governance or whatever. You need to define your freedom. But saying freedom itself is meaningless is absolute bullshit. Like liberty is a negative freedom, meaning that the government will not come in and impose its will upon you. That's liberty. We live in a liberal and libertarian society largely. When it comes to freedom, it largely means capacity to do. And there's kind of like two capacities. There's one that's kind of like a negative freedom thing where you are just not prohibited from doing it. And then two, with like positive freedom, I suppose, means that you have the money, energy, access, and ability. And what's interesting is the United States does not guarantee you money, energy, and access to be able to be free. It largely just limits the government from impeding on your freedom. So Dave saying that freedom is a largely meaningless term, again, I feel like obfuscation, or what was the other word that he used? Equivocation. Equivocation is when you use an overly vague term in order to conceal meaning. I think he's obfuscating the word freedom. There's a specific understanding. There's multiple specific understandings of the word freedom. Again, I hate this motherfucker with every single inch of my body.
What is when we say someone has freedom, we know that the state needs to limit some of their activities and it needs to enable other ones. And if people cannot agree on what is the good life and what a person's life should be directed towards, it's my understanding.
Conservatism asked if I was referring to Sufism when I was talking about a mystical Islamic sect that is persecuted all over the world. Yes, I was thinking of Sufism.
That their belief in freedom will not match up. A great example of this for me is drugs. I, among a lot of other right-wingers, do not believe you have a right to ruin your life with drugs. But a lot of leftists do believe you have this right. If the two moral perspectives on what a good life looks like differ, then the ideas of freedom will also differ as well.
Yeah, I think that people can have different disagreements on what are the freedoms that matter and what rights are worth preserving. I certainly don't go as far as saying that.
I'm going to hit it at 1.15. It's kind of like, it sounds a little crazy at first, or 1.2. It sounds a little crazy at first, and then your earballs kind of get used to it. I like 1.2. I think it's a decent blend between being able to hear what's being said, but also not having those like dramatic pauses in speech.
People have a right to recreational drugs. I don't think that that necessarily means I'm in favor of making it criminal, but I think there's a difference between making something criminal and like making it illegal versus do you have a right, a negative right to not be intruded on your ingestion of recreational drugs. I've never held that position, and people can have different disagreements on that, or whatever, right? My whole point is the Constitution isn't the Ninth Amendment in the Constitution recognizes that just because we enumerate some rights here in the Constitution doesn't mean that they are all the rights that matter, or that we're not trying to disparage other rights that may exist. And that reflects the kind of natural rights philosophy of a lot of these framers who are like deist, or they believed in this notion of natural rights. And so just because the Constitution doesn't protect it doesn't mean that there isn't a right to it or there ought to be a right to it. But what the Constitution does do is it gives us a system by which we can
Sorry for sneezing in your earballs.
navigate these disagreements on what are the right rights, what should be activity should be curtailed. It gives us a great framework for that, where we don't have to resort to violence, individual private violence. We can give the state the monopoly on violence, and we can sort out our difficulties through peaceful means. That's what I think is so useful about the Constitution. It's not that it's a perfect document, not that it neatly lays out all of our rights perfectly. Of course it doesn't. It was flawed at the start, ab initio, totally. But that it's useful.
Outsider Lestranger says, I just think we in the West are reverting to a very dangerous polemic that has been playing out for the last 1,000 years or so. Number one, I don't even know what the word polemic means. I've seen it used before. I don't know what polemic is, though. A speech or piece of writing expressing a strongly critical attack on controversial opinion about something or something. Expressing or constituting a strongly critical attack on or controversial opinion about someone or something polemical. I just think we in the West are reverting to a very dangerous polemic that has been playing out for the last 1,000 years. I would need an expansion on what you think is specific, because if you're talking about that, man, we had the fall of Rome. We had, the rise of Christian Rome. We had the rise of Islam. We had the Crusades and the Reconquista. We had the Renaissance and the trade, merchant, colonial era. We had colonialism and the triangle, whatever that triangle is of like slaves, tobacco, cotton, and European labor. The Atlantic Triangle, I think it's called. We had colonialization. We had the American Enlightenment revolutions. I don't even know. Like when you say that we're reverting to a single controversial idea that's playing out dangerously in the Western world, I don't even know what the fuck you're referring to, man. We've been playing with like a dozen disastrous but also creative ideas in the Western world. So I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about, man.
Full structured framework to order our society. And look at the results. We are the strongest country. We are the most powerful country. We have some of the best art in the world. And you want to give that up? Why?
I mean, the best art in the world was created by, Italian despots in the Renaissance, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not so sure I'd use that as a basis of government. But
you'd rather look at those paintings than like watch Game of Thrones?
Well, if it's between
I'm joking.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of yeah. That's fair.
This is a joke. That's a joke. I just don't think. So the mechanism for resolving moral disagreements is voting. I mean, you can just look at this. When it comes to how we are.
Hold up. When it comes to resolving moral disagreements, number one, we live in a liberal or libertarian society, which means that if you're not hurting me and I'm not hurting you, we leave each other the fuck alone. So not every moral disagreement is resolved at the ballot box. But yes, resolving moral differences at the ballot box is substantively a better resolution than resulting it interpersonally. Because oftentimes when we're talking about resolving it interpersonally without a government or, legislation, what we're talking about is violence. So I am very curious where Distributist is going to go with this.
Range our society with regards to sex and drugs and allocating resources. If there's one thing.
Kazrock says, Connor, she said I have racist and bigoted people around me just because they're racist. I can't hate them. It is what it is. Somehow it's racist. People are some sort of stuff. That's not even something to get mad about. I got racist friends. Yeah, no shit. Do you know why I'm so willing to embrace like moderate racism and moderate sexism? It's because I do not want to attract the kind of people that will moral frog over a off-color joke. So QT Cinderella being attacked for saying, yeah, I got some edgy friends. That's the kind of audience that I absolutely want to avoid.
That we've learned is that voting does not resolve issues of fundamental moral systems. What happens is, like, it used to be that a lot, like, people would argue over a tax, and then the tax would get passed, and then they'd stop arguing about it after the election cycle. But when it comes to fundamental moral issues, the conversation can never stop. It just keeps on going, and it keeps on getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And a great example of this is things like sexual liberty or drugs or any of the innovations that we've added into our society.
Compared to what? Like a draconian person just instituting sexual norms that they prescribe upon society? How about you live your life, I live my life? How about that shit?
Society. post the 60s. These things were all heavily guarded. There were moral.
Sorry, real quick. Outsider says, a nation-state violence of Islamic-aligned countries equals Islamic followers in the West. That just doesn't even make sense. The Middle East is a bunch of authoritarian regimes formed post the Ottoman Empire. I don't even think that's good analysis, outsider to the stranger. I don't even think most Muslim-dominated governments in the Middle East and North Africa are responsible for a substantive amount of the violence. I think it's extra state actors. Jihadist organizations are oftentimes not the people in political power. It's jihadist organizations that are outside the realm of power that are causing the violence. So I don't even think blaming the authoritarian regimes. The reason why I don't like Bashir al-Assad or Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein or the Ayatollahs or whatever, the reason why I don't like them isn't because they're Muslim. The reason why I don't like them is because they're authoritarians. It's because that they brutalize their own society in order to force down their own views. And their views are a mix of secular and religious. They're not exclusively religious. When it comes to religious sectarian violence, oftentimes that's not perpetuated by the state. That's extra state actors attacking each other. So I don't even know if I agree. I don't even know if I agree with your comment right here. That's not what I was talking about. If I was talking about governments, then you could have just come back to me argumentatively and said that, oh, well, Europeans are peaceful now. Well, you guys had the biggest fucking war in world history. That's why you're peaceful now. And descriptively, I would have to agree, but that's not what I'm saying. Anyways, sorry.
What we would call kind of sexually moral laws in the early Americas, obviously. And most other countries highly restricted drug use. And once all of these things become kind of active debates, or once the system starts.
Justin says they had a good talk. Is it freedom to allow your population to OD on fentanyl? Yeah, of course it is. Now, that being said, I don't even like your characterization of what's going on. Fentanyl for private consumption is banned. If you are caught selling fentanyl, oftentimes you will be incarcerated for vast swaths of time. If you consume fentanyl, you will be incarcerated for short amounts of time, but realistically, you're just going to die from doing drugs. But freedom is the ability to do right things, and freedom is the ability to do wrong things. So freedom is scary. Freedom is fucked up. Freedom does a lot of crazy shit. However, freedom is preferable to the alternative. I probably feel about free societies the same way that I feel about democracy, okay? Democracy, the worst form of government except for all the other ones. I feel freedom, the best way to live, the worst way to live except for all the other ones. It's almost identical. It's almost one-to-one. I think so many people squander and waste their God-given gifts. But when I look at authoritarian societies, they are so much more repulsive. Instinctively repulsive to me.
Managing education, right? How does there can't be any debate over what moral system is taught in education. The government manages education for the most part in this country, and no one's ever going to agree to have their enemy's moral system taught over theirs in a publicly financed education system. And there's no such thing as a morally neutral education. So.
Yes, because we are liberal and we prefer liberalism and libertarianism and republicanism over your fucking neo-monarchist, dissident, right-wing, fucking cringe, pseudo-fascistic slop. Sorry. Not sorry.
Who says that there's such a thing as morally neutral education?
I said that. I mean, there's lots of people who say that, and I would endorse that opinion, yes.
You think that I mean, you said it yourself, right? Like, even just selecting
Bonnie Blue hurts me psychically.
What to teach at what time is an editorial choice of some kind, right? Like,
no, that's what David's saying. Yes, you guys. Yeah,
but like, I'm saying, like, who thinks that education isn't norms based or?
Okay, well, hold on.
Well, it would have to be, but.
Outside of the Stranger says, does Connor ever do call-ins? As I like his takes, but I'd love a chance to do direct questions. Just DM me on Discord, man. We could set up a one-on-one as long as you got a good topic.
Because you've got an active culture where no one can agree what moral system is taught.
Right, yes. So, hold on. We're going to all agree on that.
Hold on. This is incorrect again. Liberal. God, I hate this guy. I have to do a drawing. Dave is a smug autist. Welcome to the... God, I hate this. Morality. Somebody correct me. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to let you correct me. I'm just going to go Google it. Let's Google it. What is morality? Morality. Definition. Principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good or bad behavior. Okay. What is good or bad? Question mark. What is right or wrong? Question mark. That's morality. Okay? This motherfucker is saying that it's impossible to resolve moral questions within a liberal system, which is bullshit. Okay? Here's an authoritarian system. One guy says, this is what's right, or I'll kill you. Okay? This is an authoritarian system. Let me use the eraser to get rid of this real quick. Fucking hell. I know that my chat is 3,000 IQ, so I don't even have to explain this shit. Okay? But I'm going to anyways. And then the population goes, holy shit, I don't want to die. I will do what you say. Okay? Then a liberal society says we have a culture, and we have a population, and we have academia, and we have the media, and we have public education, and we have the legislature, and we have, well, actually, that should be the military, and we have the legislature, and we have a president, and we have a judiciary. And what we're going to do is we're going to argue about what's right or wrong, and then we're largely going to try to leave each other the fuck alone. Unless you're hurting someone else, leave each other the fuck alone. Well, hold on, that's incorrect. Unless you're hurting someone else, we will leave you alone. Leave each other the fuck alone. This is a liberal system. Okay? And guess what? This is a moral judgment. Because there's moral confusion about certain topics that people disagree on, they're going to be fighting through all these various power structures about what is right. But that's just true about human conscience. Even within dictatorial societies, people are fighting over the conscience of the dictator. Even within dictatorial societies, the subculture is fighting about what's right and what's wrong, and whether or not the dictator should be in charge to dictate their lives. These arguments have moral content in and of themselves. Liberalism is a moral system. So basically, if you say this system is good or this system is good, these are not morally neutral statements. So once again, Dave using words to piss me off.
Like a tax that people forget about after it gets passed. It becomes an active sore point for each side when they lose. And so the controversy never tapes down.
But Dave, hold on, I want to ask you directly, just on this, like you brought up drugs. Okay, so let's, in terms of pure practical politics, to the degree that you differ with Pisco or whoever, like anyone, what do you think should be done to address like the free use of drugs that, or the more free use of drugs that we have now than what is ideal? Like, is there particular legislation that you think needs to be passed? Yeah,
we need an absolute crackdown on drug use. These people who are killing themselves on the street.
We've been fighting a war on drugs with mass incarceration since 1960. So we've been doing what Dave is suggesting for 65 years.
where in the various towns I have lived in, they need to be sent to institutions to detoxify and also be treated for their mental illnesses indefinitely until they're better. And we need to get all of the drugs off
We agree on institutionalization.
the street by whatever means necessary.
Okay, let me ask this is a principle question, just a matter of principle. If it was the case that cracking down on drugs,
Doobie, I fucking love guardrails. Did you miss my multiple rants where I said Bonnie Blue having sex with 1,000 guys is indicative of some profound mental illness that deserves her being institutionalized for whenever she can fix her issue to not want to bang 1,000 dudes? Did you miss that? I think you might have missed that.
practically just didn't work. Like the war on drugs was a failure. We know that. If it was the case that there was no practical enforcement of no state, mechanism that you could to enforce.
Gotcha. Kazra says, my name is Kazra. Just call me K. I don't want to go through that every time, brother. Okay, my bad. Kazra.
People to not use drugs.
Would you still ban it? It's a good question.
Yeah. What would your attitude be? Or
Hell yeah, dude. I know what Bonnie Blue looks like. Get the fuck out of here, Christian. I know what she looks like.
do you just think this is a ridiculous question?
If it led to horrible consequences and didn't even help the drug problem, would you still be in favor of it? Basically, is your support for banning drugs? Okay, right. Okay.
It's 100% depend on it working. Yes.
Yeah.
If you told me with perfect clarity that cracking down on the drugs would lead to more drugs, then I would be against cracking down on drugs.
Okay. Now,
the state just takes the action to remove the problem.
Okay, so let me ask you then, just broadly, given that we have done like a war on drugs, and to my limited understanding,
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
it has been a failure. Why don't you think there's reason to suspect that the state cracking down on drug use would be lead to failures, given that it has historically? Or do you think there are things that we're not doing that we need to be doing that have been done before?
In all cases that I've seen, where there's a problem coming here that our culture is collapsing, and when cultures collapse, they're more vulnerable to drugs. A great example, and I don't mean to ramble, but a great example is like opium in China. Like China had this disintegrating culture in the 19th century, was super vulnerable to opium, but then when the strong governments came in the 20th century, there's like no opium problem in China anymore. There's other problems, but not that one, right? And so, because our culture is in this degenerate state, we're very vulnerable to drugs. My opinion is not that government crackdowns solve the problem. It's just that they marginally make it better. And the amount marginally they make it better is worth the cost of doing them in almost all cases.
Okay. I'm okay with this, and I'm actually okay with this historical analysis that China was effectively force-fed drugs via the British during the Opium Wars. Through the 18th and 19th century, the Brits got super concerned with running a commodity trade deficit with China, where they were emptying their vaults of silver and gold. What limited gold they had, but they had shitloads of silver. They were emptying their vaults of silver, and in turn, they were getting back like tea and consumer goods. And so the Brits were super concerned that they had a trade imbalance with China. So what they did, since they owned India and they owned Afghanistan, is they pointed a gun at the Chinese emperor and they said, you will allow us to sell opium to your population. And that was after China had already done a bunch of like anti-drug, anti-opium crackdowns. And so they effectively force-fed China opium against the Chinese government's will, which I think is like a moral horror. I think it's one of the most fucked up things that the Brits have ever done. And the Brits have done like quite a few fucked up things. But anyways, the point is that what's interesting about the Chinese analogy, though, is so he says, oh, well, China had a whole bunch of other problems besides the drug problem, but dealing with the drug problem through enforcement allowed them to focus on other problems. Was one of the China is almost perfectly the argument for Burkean conservatism, because what happened was the imperium, the emperor and the empress at the late stages of China, they vacillated between reform and sticking with Chinese tradition. And if anything, they stuck with Chinese tradition to the point that they made their institutions so brittle that it was inevitable that it was going to collapse. And so the argument, Dave Green's historical assessment, I like where he went with it. I agree with what was said, but right there, right next to his historical analogy is why I believe in the politics that I believe in. Awesome. But also fuck you.
Yeah. So in response
and
to
Pisco, you disagree?
I do, but I mean, it has more to do with the other collateral consequences of that kind of crackdown. That's number one. Is basically, I think it's a giant waste of money, and it will involve the same kind of rights deprivations, right? Because I'm assuming to crack down even more than what we've been seeing so far. And to be clear, Paul's right. I mean, we've seen massive efforts by the government in the last 100 years to crack down on drug use, using police officers, criminalizing that kind of stuff. And so I imagine any kind of like increased effort is going to massively expand government bureaucracies, and it's going to massively increase spending, and it's going to involve, getting around those pesky little probable cause and warrant.
Bell Runner says, got some oil for the channel. Thanks for the excellent content and looking forward to liberal pro-gun education. Thank you, Fell Runner. Thank you for renewing your membership. Quick reminder to everybody, like the stream. It's free. Share it with your friends. If you have a good time, tell them about us. Engage with chat. We have lots of funny, smart, interesting, cool people who hang out with us daily. Super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them. Thank you for your financial support. Thank you for your viewership.
Requirements to go after drugs in that sense. Those consequences don't seem worth it to me. Yeah, go for it.
I mean, you don't think it's worth, where I used to live, there are just several people who are obviously killing themselves with all of these new drugs, these post-fentanyl drugs that have come on the scene. You think it would be a waste of money to take that person and forcibly put them into a rehab clinic where they...
10 Train says, what's the bar for causing harm to society? I'm not going to fall down this bait only because I've actually derailed 2 or 3 segments just arguing with liberals in my chat about what's the limit of sexual promiscuity where it becomes self or social harm. And by the way, self-harm would still be something that I think you should be institutionalized for. So as an example, if somebody's a cutter, if somebody takes a razor blade and they just start slashing their arm, and you're like, well, they're only hurting themselves. Who gives a shit? I think you're wrong. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole only because I've been down that rabbit hole 2 or 3 times now. But self-harm is still cause for institutionalization, in my opinion.
Be gotten off the drug.
I didn't say that in that specific case. I think it would be a waste of money. I said that the other, the rights deprivation. I don't know how you'd calculate that in terms of the amount of money.
Well, you're violating the person's right to use drugs. Certainly, they don't want to go to these facilities. They want to go out and use them.
If you're criminalizing their conduct. I'm not sure. You have to value a life there, and like what the court processes are, how much it costs to have police to pick them up.
I'm speaking normatively.
Normatively, all else equal, if it were costless to help this person by putting them in a treatment facility, I'm not sure.
Well, if it costs what it costs, you think that the cost to put them in a treatment facility is too much of an expenditure.
Material cost or cost in terms of deprivation of other rights?
Excuse me.
Which cost are you referring to, Pisco?
I'm talking about the total cost of the enforcement package that Dave has offered. He's now localizing it to a particular individual for a particular.
I'm just going to say that I appreciate It's Just Avi now more because he's been with me for 3 years. But he said, based Qing dynasty, Qing, because Q is pronounced that way. Qing dynasty history, do the Taiping Rebellion next. Based.
Particular individual, if you knew you could save their life, wouldn't it be worth spending some amount of money? Yeah, sure, but not infinite, right? You wouldn't be in favor of $1 billion to do this kind of program per person, right? So there's at some point, I'm not sure what the cost passes that threshold, and you're going to have to price in the potential rights deprivation. But I can't, as I sit here, give you like where that cost becomes not useful anymore. But it's
yeah. What's actually interesting is there's actuarial tables for like human productivity, and I think that they've come out with like the average. Like, what is a human life worth? What is the average human life worth monetarily in the US? The average human life worth in the US is not a single fixed number, but is often used by government agencies to evaluate regulations and ranges from approximately 9 million to 13 million. The value of statistical life is calculated by agencies like the Department of Transportation and Environmental Protection Agency based on factors like how much people are willing to pay to reduce risk or wage differences for more dangerous jobs. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services used a figure for 13 million in 2024. Now, I don't know if this is exactly what I'm looking for, but it's either this stat or it's another stat. And the stat is effectively like the economic productivity of an average human life or something. Economic productivity value of a U.S. worker human life. I don't know if this is going to pop or not. So the economic productivity value of a U.S. worker is not a single figure, but is estimated based on factors like age, income, and remaining work years, discounted to a present value. This value can range from approximately $1.2 million for a child to over $1.6 million for a young adult. And so what's interesting about this is that means that the average American productive human life is worth around $1 million. Now, of course, if you're like a welfare sink, you cost money, right? But if you look at what Americans produce, it looks like we are all worth approximately $1 million of economic activity over the course of our lives. And so that's where I'm trying to think of it. You kind of have to, when you're thinking about a person and you're thinking about like, you know, what Pisco was asking, which I think this points to, is if you could guarantee that you could save every junkie on the street from dying from drugs or dying from diseases of despair, but you had to pay $500,000 in order to save them, but you also reduced the amount of people, so you kind of like increase the net economic activity of the United States of America, that would actually, $500,000 per person would be a worthwhile investment. However, if it cost $1 billion, there's 330 million people in the United States. Let's say that it cost $1 billion per person, so it was $330 billion. Technically, we could afford that. Like, I think we spend. Oh, hold on, I did that math wrong because it's 330 million, not 330. My bad. But let's just pretend that we could spend, you know, $1 billion per person, and we could afford that in order to save their life. Well, their economic productivity is such that you are spending 99% more to save their life than you're getting back. And so while it's pragmatic, while it's a little cold, there's a utilitarian calculus to, you do not want to endlessly dump the national treasure into trying to save people who do not want to be saved. So, all right.
At some point, wait, Dave, right? you agree? Like, if it were $1 billion to save that one person, you would never be like, that's okay, right?
Only when it gets to the case where the impact on the federal budget would cause more harm. But it would have to get pretty high for that to be the case, considering how many billions we waste on other things.
That's what I mean. It's like, whenever we look at these policies, it can be easier to have like a stylized example where it's just one person and we're doing the trade-off, and then we basically have to calculate the worth of a life, and that's going to depend on the specifics.
How does one reach for free will? You become a Such an Adam subscriber, but don't do that. I'll give you free will, and I'll give you base takes. So become a Counterpoint subscriber instead.
Of the individual, is that person young? Are they likely to be recidivist? Like, I'm not able to calculate that right now.
Can I make it a little bit more sharp here?
Yeah.
If we were to institute the regulations we had on mental health and drug usage that we had in the 50s, where people could be basically committed to mental asylums for exhibiting the behavior that's regularly exhibited in towns like Berkeley and San Francisco and New York, if we implemented and enforced those laws, we would immediately be able to take an enormous number of people off the streets who are obviously killing themselves.
I think that there is some space for, I want to be clear.
Sorry. I know my laugh sounds weird, but I can't laugh the full way that I normally laugh because I'll actually start coughing. Conservative liberalism says, Jesus famously said, you will be judged by how you treat the least amongst you. As long as you do a cost-benefit analysis that says their economic potential is worth saving. Damn, bro. I'm going to have to answer to God for that one, huh? Woo! That's, whoops. I forgot Jesus was watching. My bad.
I think that there is some space for mandatory, I don't know if you want to call them asylums, or mandatory detaining people who are a risk to themselves, but it has to reach a threshold, and there needs to be a showing. It's not enough for the government just to allege it. And because I'm so jealous and guarded of the rights of individuals to be free.
Corey Peltzman, D's nuts. Like the stream. Share it with your friends. Engage with chat, super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them. Let's go.
Live their life in general. I'm again, I want to stress, I'm not saying that you have an individual right to consume recreational substances. I'm not saying that. But in general, I am concerned about encroachment by the state.
Sorry, I'm happy that worked. Paul, for 10 euros, says, sir, you drive a hard bargain. Thanks, man. Thanks for the super chat. That's how you do it, kids. That's how you do it. They're like, hey, where can I find this product? And you're like, hey, not only do I have that product, there's something more. Oh, hi, Indy. Hi, Indy.
And so even though I can see a world in which I would support mandatory, state facilities for certain levels of mental illness and certain levels of, your danger to yourself and others, doesn't mean that I will for all the cases you're talking about. And it will have to have an evidentiary showing of some kind to some arbiter. That's not just.
I understand the concern. I'll put it this way, and this is an interesting perspective, Paul, to bring it back to our original point on liberty, the way people from the 18th century would have imagined it. If I were to take people from the 18th century and show them, like George Floyd, they would say, this man is enslaved to drugs. And George Floyd was a slave, and he was a slave to fentanyl. And a cruel master it was, because that master killed him. If George Floyd had been incarcerated against his will, or been made a serf and put under a king that would take the fentanyl away from him and force him to work, that would have been better for George Floyd than having his entire life enslaved to this horrific substance. And
yeah, but not what a cucked attitude, man. So because the least amongst us don't have self-control or discipline, we must give up our freedom to a monarch who is going to just rule justly, and we just have to presume that they're going to rule justly, which is so funny because even from like an English monarchical sense, they were expecting King George to rule justly. The whole predicate of the American Revolution was that English monarchy was not sufficiently competent to address the needs of the American people, and it in of itself was abusive and authoritarian to the degree that revolution was not only beneficial, it was moral. It was a moral duty to rebel against the crown. So that's where, for me, this is just like a totally cucked, people talk about slave morality. People talk about Christianity being slave morality. I could not imagine simping for monarchy in 2025. What a dipshit fucking take. I fucking hate that.
And so I question, in a reality where people can have their liberties destroyed by drugs, what it means for someone to have a liberty of individual choice to exist in this situation. And
that's just an equivocation,
we're the freest country in the world. If we're the freest country in the world, and a certain percentage of our population is killing themselves on drugs, that is not a free country, in my opinion.
That's just an equivocation on what we mean by freedom and liberty here. So you can think
That's not equivocation.
Come on, hit him with liberty is negative, freedom is positive. Hit him with it.
It's a different definition than you're using.
Well, I'm not. I think that would be an equivocation by definition, right? Like you're basically saying the famous.
So hold on, it's an argument between positive and negative freedom, right?
Yeah,
Dave is using the positive freedom, and you're using the negative.
No,
I'm using an older concept. He's using a newer one. I don't think
he's
clearly fits into the positive negative, but yeah.
He's thinking of some liberty, which kind of.
Unork says, "What if you put the word Constitution in front of monarchy? That makes it better, right?" Actually, it does. Limiting the powers of the monarch through a constitution was actually a hybridization of governance done by England. But then once again, because they had aristocratic tendencies, the aristocrats just viewed the plebeian serfs as like subhuman work cattle. And that's just how they ruled them for centuries, if not millennia. So once again, like, is constitutional monarchy better than just like dictatorial or divine right monarchy? Yeah, it is. But is republicanism, is freedom, is the ability to determine your own destiny economically and spiritually, is that a value that I think is worth the risk and dangers? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that Dave is not only is he a cuckold for himself, a political cuckold for himself, he's volunteering you for political cuckoldry. And I'm not interested.
I don't know, presupposes a free will of some kind, or some kind of notion of like your true self and what your true self wants.
Liberty. Yeah. I mean, this is sort of, I guess it's sort of an Aristotelian. Maybe I don't want to butcher Aristotle here, but it is a liberty that has it's morally ordered, and this is what the kind of liberty that people in the 18th century would have thought of as liberty. It's not license to do whatever you want. It's liberty to pursue passionately like a good life of your own.
Right. So it presupposes a notion of what a good life is, and it presupposes some kind of like.
No, it doesn't. It just presupposes that you're going to pursue the good life and that you will come up with a definition of it. I actually don't think the American experiment necessarily presupposes what the good life is. What is it? Is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? I don't think that there's a lot of like prescriptions for the pursuit of happiness within the Declaration of Independence or Constitution itself. However, I think that we have defined that culturally, obviously through laws. So for instance, like we do not condone heroin use, aggressive heroin use, as a viable pursuit of happiness, but we've legislated that, right? We came to a cultural consensus through legislation.
Natural inclination or some kind of free will that is, like some kind of libertarian free will that's independent of these substances. That
I'm going to lift a little bit of weights while we're still listening to these cats yap.
No one could freely choose to decide to take these drugs in a way that they would not be quote unquote enslaved by that. And so it's not a notion that I think I truly comprehend. I don't even know if like the notion makes much sense to me, but it's certainly not what I mean.
Does it not make sense to you? If I were to say people are enslaved, how does that concept not make sense to you? These people's lives are dominated by this thing. The dreams they had as children are being destroyed. It's destroying their families.
Well, I agree with that. No, I agree that it's having negative results on them. I just don't understand in what sense they're not free.
Hold on, wait. I don't want to
definitions here.
Yeah, and I don't want to end with maybe one potential point of agreement after this. But when someone says this person is a slave to drugs.
Yeah, they just mean that their life is having a bunch of deleterious effects from drugs, and it's limiting like what they're.
I feel like they're just using the same different words to describe the same problem. I think Pisco might be being a little bit obtuse here.
Able to do, but again, when you have a sense of freedom, it's like that notion is like you get to choose.
I don't want to butcher Aristotle here as a dope way to say that you're about to butcher Aristotle. So true.
Choose what you want to do, and when you choose drugs, it's really it's not really you choosing. That's the kind of the problem I'm running into is separating the choice to do drugs from these other choices.
Hi, Rob Zabas. What's up, man? Thank you, Tristan Clark, for the membership. Appreciate you, brother.
In the sense of freedom.
Really different. Older thought had a more holistic view. It was a morally guided liberty. So, I mean, and it's not just about limiting choices. Like I got married, right? By me marrying my wife, I limited my ability to sleep with other women, right? That's still an act of liberty to marry her, right? You have the liberty to marry. That is part of ordered liberty because it is part of the things, that we've considered morally virtuous actions that you could take to create a life for yourself.
Paul, that's what he means. It presupposes some virtuous set of things.
Yes.
It does.
Right. Yes.
Intention.
Yes.
No, I'm
not disagreeing with
I'm just clarifying that this kind of like stance independent objective morality is not something that I truly understand.
I know. We talked about this in our conversation. Okay, hold on.
But I'm contesting that you can have a moral independent notion of liberty that isn't just implicitly ridiculous.
Well,
it's fine. Hold on. Moral philosophy. We'll go on a metaphysical route. I don't want to go
sure.
Okay, so hold on. This is a clarifying question, Dave, from the last conversation we had, and I don't know whether Pisco will agree or not. But you said you are not a nationalist, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
You asked me this.
Yeah. So Donald Trump is a big nationalist, and a lot of the MAGA and like Nick Fuentes type right figures are calling themselves nationalists. So Dave, why don't you agree to the term nationalist, or what?
I'm actually super curious about this. Also, remember, you always have the liberty to lift weights.
Against nationalism.
The reason why I'm laughing at this,
even in prison, you're allowed to lift weights.
This is because when you had the conversation with Pisco, you said it was just something you agree with fascists on, and Pisco said the thing I agree with fascists on is their opposition to the old like imperial aristocracy, and
Outside of the Stranger says, I'm in your Discord, but where do I message? Just do add Counterpoints in the chat, and I'll DM you. I'll DM you. We're not chatting today, but I'll DM you, and we can yap it out.
The conservatives, the sort of like blue-blooded conservatives,
which they were, right? They were.
They were. Yeah. It is my opinion that the blue-blooded conservatives in Germany and Austria would have been a better choice for Germany than Adolf Hitler. And I'm copying that opinion from my grandparents, but that is my opinion, and that is one of the reasons why I am not a nationalist. Hitler is a great case study in the failures of nationalism. Nationalism, first of all, I mean, we're talking. I want all ethnicities and groups to thrive. Look, I am very concerned about African Americans thriving, which is one reason why I'm so anti.
Aw. Aw, he's a nice dissident right-wing freak. Aw. I change everything I said about the Distributist. He loves the blacks. He loves the Jews. He doesn't want the race war. I want to see where this goes, though, because it could be hiding his power level or it could be total bullshit. Maybe he's changed in the past 5 years. I don't know. Let's see.
Drug, and
Anti what?
Anti-drug.
Anti-drug.
Drug.
Okay, yeah.
Drug. I think we agree that drugs have maybe had some deleterious effects on the cohesion of the African American family.
Sure.
And I absolutely want these people to have a future. And I think that it's the responsibility of governments to be like, I am your ruler, and this is the future that you have as various people that make up my nation. But the thing is, once the nationalism comes into play, what happens is, and this is, I'm not, people aren't, not all right-wingers agree with me. This is, a lot of right-wingers love nationalism. What I feel is it creates a situation where the best, you start fighting these battles for this concept of a people that is totally detached from the actual good of the people themselves. It's just tied to this political project. What we call the political formula of the state becomes tied to this hypothetical concept of ethnicity. And I feel that this has caused a lot of problems. I felt that this drove a lot of problems inside the Third Reich. If you go back to earlier forms of government, like the Habsburgs, which were,
multi-ethnic empire with a lot of different.
Yeah, I mean, they ruled a multi-ethnic empire. They didn't have to they waged a war. They might have waged a war against Russia over territorial.
Damn, bro. I was not expecting that. That's a fucking curveball for me. But all right, keep going.
Concerns, but it was not like this total state racial war in the name of the folk, because they understood that they had all of these little patchworks of things, and they still had to take into consideration ethnicities. There were certain ethnicities that were more friendly to them and more hostile. The Serbs were very hostile, the Hungarians were neutral, and the Germans were very positive on the Habsburgs, generally speaking. But what I admire in those governments that are I'm sure Pascal would call them authoritarian, is that they were able to kind of bring together this patchwork of people and allow all of the people to thrive and not fight and kill each other, or get into these cosmic wars of continental domination, which I see as very, very destructive, and which I see Hitler, the fascist nationalism, is very much driving.
I wanted to respond to that. I think it's super, super interesting.
That is really weird. It is really weird to have a neo-monarchist, authoritarian, anti-nationalist. That's weird as fuck, but it's interesting.
Because usually you are seeing among the right the nationalistic types, and you have a lot of people recoiling at the notion of like a multi-ethnic political constituency or political unit, whatever you want to call it. I'll be curious to ask Dave, not right now, but I will ask you at some point, what he thinks defines the American nation or the American people. If not the Constitution, what is it? If you're not going to go by this kind of like ethnic solidarity, which I think he's right to reject in the American context. And really, I don't.
I can answer that question.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
I mean,
I was gonna say because we'll wrap up in 15 or so 20 minutes, so maybe this is a good one to end on.
Now the competition's gotten interesting.
Yeah, right. Well, it's my fault for allowing the first 40 minutes to happen.
We had 40 minutes of arguing over language, and now we're finally getting to the interesting philosophical, political concepts.
Right. I've learned my lesson.
Guess I'm enjoying it as well. Keep going. Let's go.
Well, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's cost of doing business for these things, isn't it? I mean, America is really, America is really a group of ethnicities. And
bear in mind that this dude said to my face like 5 years ago, he was like, "You're not a real American. You're an Irishman, brainwashed into thinking you're an American. And 50 years from now, if we let too many Hispanics and blacks into our nation, we're going to have a apocalyptic race war." So I'm actually super curious about where this is going.
Religions that for a time operated under a single government and have been kind of moved around a lot. America is defined by a lineage of creative beliefs, mostly religious, but also pertaining somewhat to this mythological understanding of the Constitution and these weird mythological ideas of the founding fathers. I respect those beliefs. I'm very skeptical of them, as you might have gathered. And that is the concept of America. It is not one group of people, it is many groups of peoples. Although I think in the 20th century, you could squint your eyes and say that there was an American white ethnicity and also an American black ethnicity. But I don't think there's ever been like one American ethnicity. And what do you think is the definition of America?
I think I think it's totally, not to say totally, but like largely a product of the traditional American history and the American Constitution. So the United struggle to throw off the yoke of the British and the American constitutional tradition, and the people that uphold that history, those beliefs, that Constitution throughout the course of time. I think that's how I view the American.
I mean, that's how I view it too. I think we're a propositional nation. I think that civic nationalism is based. I love paperwork nationalism. And if I had to summarize this without being a total dick to Dave, which I know I've been consistently a biased asshole to, I think that he just thinks that it's mythological, it's very ethereal, it's not enough to hold us all together, whereas I think it is. I think that's probably the crux of our disagreement, which is interesting because I think I needed to differentiate nation state in my mind before I could hear what he was saying. I still think his perspective on the role of the state is very fucking stupid. However, I do like that I have, through knowledge, through bashing my head into the Twitch and YouTube political space for 5 years, I do appreciate that. I think I probably have I think he might have evolved in his understanding, but I think that I've also evolved in my understanding through bashing my head into the wall of Twitch and YouTube politics for 5 years. So cheers to that
Project. What I think there's some unity on us is, or I'm just curious, why does that not commit you to some version of open borders or letting all different groups of people inside the country?
I told you that America comprises a finite number of ethnicities. It's not defined by the Constitution.
Would it include like the Chinese?
Well,
interesting.
That's one sub-ethnicity that came in the early 20th century, I suppose. It's not the same.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
lost,
it seems that if
Christopher Hoffland 8409 says, here is an odd conundrum about your take on Bonnie Blue. There are papers that link to female autism. It sounds stupid, but ASD seems to be dimorphic to hypersexuality. Interesting. So she has autism? Let's get her some meds. Let's get her some let's get her some attention deficit disorder meds and see if that makes her focus on something besides apparently, you know, Destiny said that his ADHD made him, excuse me, sexually compulsive. Maybe we just need to get her, maybe we need to institutionalize Bonnie Blue, get her in front of a psychiatrist, give her some ADHD medicine, and then boom, we solve her hypersexuality. Thanks, Christopher. I'm gonna write that down.
If there's no sense of America that is grounded in there is some kind of like shared historical myth making that you identified there, and I agree it has to be vague to capture what the term of the American nationhood is, I think, accurately.
Conservative liberalism says this nibba just described the philosophy surrounding natural rights as mythological beliefs and favors the divine right of kings. Yes, that's where we're at.
But if we're not grounded in particular beliefs or adherence to the Constitution, it feels like America is just like a landmass that can change based on different immigration patterns, and that its core features, there's no consistency throughout time and space. And I'm
that's
curious.
A problem if you don't believe that there's a core.
Verifies TTV says, bro, I want to argue with people, but you seem chill, lol. Depends on the day, man. Talk to me about how Bonnie Blue should have sex with 1,000 dudes. I'll start yelling at you.
There's core ethnicities.
That's what I mean. So why aren't you in a collision course with all of these immigration hawk peoples? Like why aren't you?
I am an immigration. I'm
because he still thinks, number one, he's probably going to say that he's Christian. So the religious and moral fiber of the people who are immigrating to the United States is of concern to the nation state. But with the Habsburgs as an example, correct me if I'm wrong, weren't they like Austrian? Let's take a look at the Habsburgs. The Habsburg dynasty. Habsburg dynasty, which is so funny because what they're most famous for is incest. A powerful European royal house that ruled over much of Europe for centuries, most notably the Holy Roman Empire in Spain. The dynasty's rise began in the 15th century through a strategic marriage between Archduke Maximilian of Austria, I was right about that, and Mary of Burgundy, which expanded its territories to include the Low Countries. Let's take a look at the Habsburg dynasty at its peak. So, in my opinion, these were like Germanic motherfuckers, dude. Because this is like East Germany, I think. I think it's why is this not more visible? So it was Silesia, Bohemia, Hungary, Tyrol, Austria, Burgundy, Netherlands, Luxembourg. It looks like they didn't conquer Germany, or maybe they held parts of Germany. And then apparently through Spain, they also ruled Central and South America. That's bananas. Their sense of geographic continuity is totally off. But anyways, the whole point is the reason why he's like a constitutional Christian monarchist presiding over multiple ethnicities is because for some reason he's idealized the Holy Roman Empire as being a just way on which to govern. But that is so weird to me because what I know of the Holy Roman Empire, somebody can correct me if I want. Maybe this is just like pure vibes. But I think that the way the Holy Roman Empire was characterized to me was it was like a super dysfunctional Byzantine monarchy that was constantly being invaded and constantly invading its neighbors in order to maintain its territorial power. So somebody can correct my understanding of the, when I say Byzantine, I mean that there were like constant backstabbing politics. That's what I mean. I mean that the way that they governed was so convoluted that even the people who ran the system didn't understand how the system worked. So if somebody wants to correct my vague understanding of the Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire, please do so. But it is so fucking weird to me. This is just autism, man. I went from hating this guy to just thinking he's autistic. I hated this guy 20 minutes ago. Now I just think he has like super autism.
I'm for virtually no immigration. I don't think there should be any, virtually no immigration at this stage. It's ridiculously deleterious to the core groups that made up this country and formed it over the course of its history.
So hold on, let me ask, Dave, is there, because you said the American identity is basically a finite set of sub-ethnicities. Is there any uniting feature to like all of?
Yeah, he's saying that the uniting feature is a mythology that he's skeptical of. That's what I heard Dave say. The shit. Now I want to talk to Dave. Now I want to be like, please explain your autism. I want to understand your autism more.
These sub-ethnicities that can be described as American, is there some through line that would apply to all of them, but not other ethnicities of the kind that, you know,
well,
not necessarily allowed to immigrate?
I mean, this is you've got to the core problem.
Yeah, right.
Of our age, right? There used to be a common set of moral understandings that we all held in common, for a few reasons. It's because traditional religions that were in existence in America all had, you know, with some exceptions, more or less the same set of moral beliefs. There was very little divergence, and because the ethnicity.
Which channel says, I feel like I am R-slurred. I'll go into the 40K one and proclaim my fealty to the God Emperor, and hopefully you see my question. Perfect.
These also were very close. I mean, you know, I'm German, you know, Germans and Anglo-Saxons aren't that far apart ethnically. Now, what happened twofold, there's two things that happened. There was a cultural revolution in the 60s, and then there was a massive expansion of immigration. And now we have so many different peoples with so many different highly divergent moral systems. It's hard to say what our common unifying moral ethos is. You know, for instance, like if you compared me, right, like a Catholic, you know, I might, you know, my family is very new to this country, very new, probably even newer than yours, Pisco. I don't even know what background you are ethnically, but I'm going to bet that my family is newer, or at least my father's side.
I'm first generation. I was born in this country,
okay.
But my family's from Peru.
Well, I was born in this country, but my father was born in Europe.
Interesting.
So I had a little farther back on my mother's side. But either way, right? You know, what do I have in common with Ilhan Omar? And what do we both have in common with like a trans activist like Counterpoints? It would be.
Hopefully, and I'm not saying this is true, but what should unite us is a deference to the Constitution of the United States and then even let's say Ilhan Omar or Counterpoints are not willing to pay political deference to the Constitution of the United States, they need to know that if they engage in revolutionary political activity, they will be killed or incarcerated. So at minimum, I would like loyalty, you know, I would like loyalty to the civic nationalist mythos of the United States. But if I can't get loyalty, I need at least legal deference. And that's part of the reason why I would want to control immigration, is because a lot of open borders advocates, they're like, oh no, they don't need to sign on to the Constitution. They don't need to sign on for civic nationalism. You know, they'll probably obey the law. So who gives a shit? And it's like, yeah, you're a fucking idiot and you're going to destroy this whole thing. So Horse God says, congratulations on being caught up in chat. Thank you, Horse God. This is actually the first time I've seen you chat, unless you go under a different name normally. If Japan can ban the production of sesame in the 90s and possession in 14, we can ban alcohol. No. Doobie just said that child porn is as culturally integrated into Japan as alcohol is into the United States. He just called all of Japan pedophiles. That's fucking awesome. I'm so happy I streamed today. My wife was like, hey, you're a little sick. Should you go to work today? And I was like, fuck yeah, I should go to work today. Damn, that's why I'm not banning Doobie. You guys can time him out whenever he gets crazy, but you know, I don't want you to. Because you know, for 3 hours of fighting Doobie over random bullshit, you get a take like that, where pedophilia is essential. I promise you, dear viewer, pedophilia is essential to Japanese culture. That's awesome. I need to use a restroom, but I actually want to listen to some of this. I'll be right back.
Be very difficult to find. If you went through Europe and picked a random European that was like, you know, a median beliefs, they probably would have more in common with me than Ilhan Omar. And if you picked a random Catholic from anywhere in the world, but, you know, let's restrict ourselves to the Northern Hemisphere, they would probably have more in common with me than Counterpoints, the YouTuber. But for some bizarre reason, Counterpoints and me and Ilhan Omar are all Americans. That definition is so broad that it comprises almost all.
But it does comprise you.
Ever.
You think, you would identify as an American. You think it does include you. My question is like, why would it include Catholics? You know, I'm not religious.
It didn't used to. No. Well, Mike kind of did a little bit, but not very much.
But if you're open, I mean, if you think it's good that it includes Catholics, surely you think that it could, right? It is good that the American identity now includes Catholics, right? That is good. It
came at a huge cost to the ruling class when they admitted my ethnicity.
No, but is it a pro tanto good overall? Is it good? As you understand?
Certainly.
What kind of good?
It was good for me at the expense of them. Yes.
No, but do you have a notion of good? Like under your notion of good, whatever you think ought happen, right? What you think ought happen. Do you think that it's good under what you think is good that Catholics are included in the American identity?
I don't think that I'm part of the American identity in the way that someone from the Mayflower is. That's why I'm
not saying that it's exactly the same. I'm asking, to the extent that Catholics are now included as part of the American nationhood, that concept, is that good? Should that have occurred?
Should that have occurred? That's a strange question. I think it may definitely cause.
Let him answer. Go ahead.
No, it's weird, Paul, because this is essentially what happened. When the generations in the 19th century let people like my mother's generation and the Ellis Island wave in, they immediately made the identity of what it meant to be an American and what it meant to be, a Virginian mean a lot less. And in exchange, they got the ability to essentially colonize the western half of the United States. That was a trade. That was an exchange. And, I pray that the right decision was made and that the WASPs, they got more benefit in terms of the economic power of America than they lost in their cultural cohesion. But that counterfactual in an absolute sense is very difficult to answer, I find.
Wait, so you don't have an opinion on whether it was good to include Catholics as part of American society? You don't have an opinion on that?
Okay, hold on.
Catholics were included as a
I'm not asking descriptively.
Restricted right.
Wait, hold on. I have a question.
Normatively. I'm asking normatively.
Yes, Pisco. He just
Did it break down while I was gone because Pisco had some confusion about the differentiations between ethnos, nation, race, religion, and this multi-ethno-religious imperium that Dave wants to reinstitute. Which, by the way, if his dad's European, just move back to Europe, bro. If you want to be a fucking neo-monarchist, there's an entire continent dedicated to your ideas. It's called Europe. You know, how many monarchies are left in Europe right now? There's got to be at least a half dozen to choose from. How many monarchies are left in Europe? There are 12 monarchies left. Denmark, Norway, Sweden, UK, Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Dude, go to Spain. Spain, it's still, who rules? Do the Habsburgs still rule anywhere? Yes, there are living descendants of the Habsburgs dynasty today. The current head of the household of Habsburg-Lorraine is Karl von Habsburg, who is the son of the last crown prince of Austria and continues the family legacy through his work in politics and cultural heritage preservation. While the family is no longer a ruling house, members remain influential and continue to be active in various fields such as politics, diplomacy, and business. Bro, go to Austria and pledge your fealty to the House of Habsburg. Go to Austria, current day Habsburg. It's probably this guy, right? It's probably that guy in the top left. Current day Habsburgs. Dude, go to this dude with a sword and kneel before him. Put your sword on the ground and say, "Sir, I dedicate my life to the service of your family and the re-rule of your dynasty." You know, boom, there you go. You could get ruled by this gangly jawed motherfucker. Why not? Go for it.
He just explained it was a trade-off, and it's not obvious whether the trade-off is worth it.
So I'm repeating the question to make sure it's clear. You're not sure if it was good to include Catholics as part of the American nation?
King Carcana 1293 says, if the Emperor of Mankind actually came back with his current policy prescriptions, no, I wouldn't follow him. Listen, man, I'm an imperial shill. Weirdly enough, I think the Emperor of Mankind was wrong. Okay? Like I think he was unironically wrong about the nature of apotheosis and godhood. I think one of the funniest quotes from Warhammer 40K is that apotheosis does not require consent, which means that the Emperor, who was the biggest fedora-wearing fucking nerd atheist to ever walk the planet, he himself became a god against his will. I think that's hysterical.
This way, I believe that Catholics have a responsibility to assimilate.
I would be his Malcador. That's what I would do. I would not follow him blindly. I would be one of his counselors advising him. I would be like Erda or Malcador, you know, one of the perpetuals that advises him and calls him cringe and gay.
To Anglo-Protestant
I'm not asking whether they have a duty to assimilate. I'm asking whether or not you think it's
I'm misunderstanding the question, Paul.
What do you think it's good that Catholics were included as part of the notion?
Okay, hold on. We just did that. All right, we just.
Come on.
Yeah, because I'm interested in the ideas, which is what.
No.
Oh my God. So this is. We were having such a good time, and now we're going back to these lawyerly debate tactics.
Lawyerly. I just want to get.
It is.
I want to get clarity on the view.
Can I ask Pisco, what am I? Can you put a little more finer point on it? Certainly historic occurrences happen, and they cause some good and some.
The Hunt DTS, thank you for your $5, King. Republicans openly hating the Constitution boggles my mind. Trump brain rot. You are not alone, King. There are dozens of us. Have you guys seen this clip? It's from the critically acclaimed show Arrested Development. And there's a guy in there, Tobias Fumke, who is a never nude. And it's a psychological disorder where you have to be constantly clothed even when you're in the shower. And so he's wearing like denim jeans in the shower. And he has this moment of public pronouncement where he says, like, worldwide, there are dozens of us. Dozens. And that's how I feel about being a never Trump Republican.
Oh, stop booing. There's nothing wrong with it. There are dozens of us. Dozens!
That's how I feel about being one of the few Republicans who doesn't hate a republic.
Bad, right?
Yeah, I understand that sometimes occurrences happen. They cause some good, they cause some bad. I'm asking you.
Oh, it's Hoach. Hi, Hoach. Good to see you.
A normative question, not historically descriptive. Was it good? Because you can look back at things in the past and say good or bad, right?
No way. Conservative liberalism says I feel like Doobie just explained food shops. It's not her fault. She's genetically predisposed. She's genetically and culturally predisposed. I'm so happy I came to work today. That's awesome.
You can go in the past and say Holocaust bad, right? So it's not this like I can't comment on history, right?
Yeah, but some things are like, this was a big problem, and it created a lot of good things, and it created a lot of bad things. And I'm afraid that if I say that this was good, it will mean that all elements, you'll confuse that.
Yeah, exactly. Thomas Martinson says Wisconsin would burn the country down again if we banned alcohol. Listen, I don't think this ban alcohol doobie talking point has much legs. Look up high school girl dating cafes in Japan. High school girl dating cafe, girl Japan dating cafes. Is it what is it? Old dudes? Is it old dudes dating 15-year-olds? What is it? Reports from credible news outlets and organizations detail how JK Business in Japan, which exploits young girls through pseudo dating and called dating cafes, are areas of significant human trafficking and sex abuse. It's not part of a normal, healthy dating culture for Japanese high school girls. The JK Business, or Joshi Kosei, means female high school student in Japanese. Exploited a business model. The JK Business includes cafes where men pay to chat or spend time with teenage. I saw that, not with Japanese high school girls, but I saw that with Filipino girls. Some of these venues employ minors, and law enforcement raids have revealed the presence of girls as young as high school students. Well, at least they're not middle school, right? Facilitate sexual exploitation, pushes exploitation underground, government acknowledge it. So JK, Japanese cafe, the JK Business. There's a Wikipedia. So I guess it's if you're an adult man, you are allowed to go to a cafe and high school girls will hang out, and you pay 20 or 30 bucks to basically hang out with them and talk to them. But of course, the implication is that it'll lead somewhere, I suppose. Well, thanks, Doobie. I guess that explains food shops. Lol.
Me endorsing all elements of this trade.
How about this? I ask you as a net positive.
Yeah, is it a net positive that Catholics were included as part of the American nationhood?
I think barely, under the provision that Catholics assimilate into WASP culture in all aspects other than their specifically confessional religious beliefs.
Wow. That's tough, because you're basically saying it's good for Catholics to convert, right? Like, why should they?
I just made an exception.
Yeah.
Said,
Oh,
other than their
confessional.
explicitly held confessional beliefs. And by the way, one of our founding fathers was a confessional Catholic that was completely WASP. It was Charles Carroll from Maryland, which was the Catholic colony. So this was always the deal with Catholics. Now, would the founding father have wanted millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of Irish to come over? Obviously not, right?
But the Catholics.
But I would like to think that they would hold.
Oh, why am I catching a stray? What the fuck did I do?
By the way, one of our founding fathers was a confessional Catholic that was completely WASP. It was Charles Carroll from Maryland, which was the Catholic colony. So this was always the deal with Catholics. Now, would the founding father have wanted millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of Irish to come over? Obviously not, right?
Damn, bro. Like, listen, I get it. There was some Protestant, Catholic, Irish, Anglo antagonisms. Matter of fact, if you want to see a movie with fresh eyes, man, you should consume all of my political content about immigration and civic nationalism and like the difference in ethno-religious shit. And then you just need to watch Gangs of New York again, because this shit is hysterical. I borderline did not understand this movie because I was raised with like pacifistic Christianity. So I was like, how the fuck are there Catholics and Protestants unironically running around with like hammers and pitchforks and knives and butcher's cleavers, and they're just beating the piss out of each other and stabbing each other to death in the street. What the fuck is this? Like, I had no idea what this movie was about as a teenager. And then now I watch it, in the backdrop of the final battle is the riots against the draft for the Civil War. It's so crazy. And effectively, like, Bill the Butcher is a Protestant Christian nationalist who views the Catholics as a pseudo-pagan invading horde. And even though they share a territory where they live, work, and eat and sleep and shit, they basically have gang-style battles relentlessly over who will dominate the criminal underworld in this territory. And Bill the Butcher ends up obviously dominating like 3/4 of the film and is ultimately killed. Spoilers. He's killed by the son of his former rival. Okay. So spoilers. Bill the Butcher in the opening battle kills Liam Neeson, who's defending the Catholics and defending the Irish immigrants, the Irish Catholic immigrants. And then Leonardo DiCaprio is Liam Neeson's son. He grows up, he becomes Bill the Butcher's protege under cover of ultimately wanting to kill Bill the Butcher. But then he has this like really conflicted relationship where he simultaneously hates Bill the Butcher for killing his father and being racist towards Irish, even though he's obviously Irish. Although I guess he goes under Amsterdam for part of the name, so I don't know if he conceals his heritage, but I would have to watch it again. But effectively, the movie ends in a new battle between the son of the Catholic warrior priest and Bill the Butcher, and I'm 99.9% sure that Leonardo DiCaprio was ultimately victorious. But if you want to look at like ethno-religious tensions in America during the 19th century, this thing is beautiful. What a crazy piece of art. This was an insane piece of art. I need to go back and watch it again.
But the Catholics,
Austria seems nice, but I've heard Latvia has a surplus of women with 54% of the population. Nice.
Irish they did for
but they,
the gentleman from Maryland who signed the Declaration of Independence.
It seems a little bit like weird to like one's religiosity, to the extent that these are devoutly held views with respect to.
Would I fight against him in the Thunder Warriors? Absolutely not, dude. The Thunder Warriors will, even if you don't fight the Thunder Warriors, they will probably desecrate your corpse.
Catholicism. How do you divorce that the confessional aspect?
Yeah, hold on. Let me ask this. Yeah. This was gonna.
Omplus Sway says, "What's the topic?" This motherfucker is a absolutely autistic, dissident right-wing neo-monarchist who is weirdly enough not that racist. Like, he's kind of racist, but he's not that racist. Compared to a lot of other people, he's not that racist. So, yeah, this is just a wild, wild conversation.
Yeah, so when you say WASP kind of culture, I vaguely have an idea of that, but like, what is an example of a cultural practice, the non-confessional part, but a cultural practice of the Catholic, that you're talking about, that is at odds and needs to be assimilated to? Yeah.
Do you know William F. Buckley?
Yes.
You know how he talked?
Yeah. But he's a Catholic. It's funny you bring up him.
Yeah,
because,
Fell Runner says, "You're a mythical creature to liberals. They don't believe you exist." I know, right?
We call that accent mid-Atlantic. You know, the accent like, "Hello there, whippersnapper. Let's go."
Yeah, it's like transatlantic, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
mid-Atlantic accent.
but he's the exception. He's not the rule. Most Catholics don't sound like.
Hold on. Yeah, hold on.
Oh, my
Go
bad.
ahead.
Look at it as if I finish the story.
Okay.
Now, the question is, why did all of these Catholics talk this way in 1950? The mid-Atlantic accent comes from the 1890s and the 1920s. Well, the reason why is that all of these Catholics that went to Ivy League schools, they got this record and they trained themselves to speak that way in an attempt to assimilate into the ruling WASP class. And once they were there, they saw their job is to take other Catholics and make sure they adopted the norms of this WASP class. Now, a lot of Catholics say, and this is a legitimate contention, that in assimilation, you lose part of kind of like your spirit that's part of your.
Yeah, Hunt DTS says, "I can't hear the word implication without thinking of the always." Dude, I almost pulled up the "It's Always Sunny" clip. I almost did.
hardcore confessional reality. But that was sort of the deal that was concocted, and that was the trade-off. And just like there was a trade-off for the WASPs who let millions and millions and millions of Catholics into.
Ew, AF Racing says, watch American Primeval if you want to see what the Mormons were like. Dude, I know about the Day Knights. I read the early Sherlock Holmes book about the Day Knight cult that murdered Wagoneers and kidnapped their women and kids. I read about that shit. That was crazy.
Their country, there was a commensurate trade-off for the Catholics that had to operate in psychofundamental.
Okay, hold on. Pisco, hold on. So Dave, an accent seems very innocuous as like some cultural clash. Why would it be so damaging that someone comes in with a different?
Yeah, SFO says, are we distributing in here? Yeah, man. This is a wild conversation. So SFO, I don't know if you're caught up on the lore. I'm going to be wrapping up in a second. But in 2019, 2020, Faraday Speaks introduced me to The Distributist. And I just said, hey, introduce me to like a far right-wing guy who can give me like the layout of what the factions are. Because I was effectively accusing Nick Fuentes of being a Nazi and of, you know, not, and my arguments weren't good. I'm not saying they were good, but especially for like figuring out what was going on. I basically thought that since he was Jew posting, he was just like a National Socialist. And a lot of Groypers, to their credit, they came over and they were like, no, he's not a National Socialist. That, you know, that's more Richard Spencer. That's more the alt-right. We're Christian nationalists. This is a difference, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, holy shit, there's like a whole autistic internet political philosophy sphere that I've never heard of before. I need somebody who can lay out the land for me. So I asked Faraday Speaks for somebody to talk to, and it was Dave. So I talked to Dave in a private conversation, and I asked him like about the Jews and Jewish power and anti-Semitism. And he's like, oh, well, are you a Fed? And I was like, well, I'm unironically a cop. So if I bump, you know, or an ex-cop. So if I bumped into people who were planning like dissident right-wing terrorism, yeah, I would snitch on you in a fucking heartbeat. And I think that kind of like put the conversation like on ice, on the brakes, where not only did he want me to listen to him about race realism and Jewish power and, you know, demographic change and all that kind of shit, he wanted me to necessarily agree with him every step of the way. He didn't just want to have a conversation about it. He wanted me to agree with him descriptively about the country before he would give me any more knowledge. And I was like, that's not what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for being Dave Green's fucking cultist. I signed up for some dissident right-wing asshole to fucking tell me what's going on in the right wing. Okay. So anyways, that was, so we've had beef since then. But what's so interesting is that I really did not, I had difficulty similar to liberty and freedom until somebody really broke it down and explained it to me. I was having difficulty differentiating liberty and freedom. Well, the same way that I was having difficulty understanding the difference between liberty and freedom because people use them synonymously, I was having problems differentiating the nation state. But now that I know the difference between the nation state, you know, nation being the people and the state being the government that's representative of the people, when Dave says shit, I understand it more deeply. And when he differentiates between like ethnos and religion and ethno-religious groups and nation and race, when he says those words, I don't hear a bunch of like vague synonyms. I actually hear like very specific descriptions of his worldview. And so while I've been pretty rude to Dave in the past, we've had some fun conversations, but I feel like I understand him more. And I blame his autism. I actually straight up, like, I don't hate, dude, I think in the past hour, I stopped hating Dave. I don't think I hate Dave anymore. I just think he's super fucking autistic. So, you know, like, I still disagree with him. I still think his perspectives suck. I still think he's a smug bitch, but I don't hate him. I don't hate him anymore. I think he's just hella autistic. If there's somebody building a $500 B&T gun, I will 100% buy a $500 B&T clone.